The first human ship to arrive at Keshet Station did not announce itself with a transmission. It did not declaim lineage, treaties, or intentions in the formal lattice language that bound the compact species together. It did not sing a beacon chord or project heraldic light. It simply appeared at the outer marker boundary with a velocity profile that made the station's traffic oracles stutter, then bled momentum in a way that no model quite predicted, as if the vessel had decided that physics was a conversation rather than a command. Teavith of the Long Coil was watching the approach from the upper observation ring, her sensory fronds relaxed in what passed for idle curiosity among her kind. She had served as an adjudicator on Keshet Station for 40 standard cycles, long enough to see 5 first contact delegations arrive in the accepted manner, each trailing escorts, each meticulously announced. This one was different. The vessel's hull was not polished into symbolic curves or etched with ancestral script. It was dark, but not the absorbent void black favored by the stealth guilds. Instead, it held a deep, uneven charcoal, scarred in places, patched in others, the texture of something repaired by hands rather than printers. Traffic Oracle 3 reports inconsistency, said the station mind, its voice diffused gently through the ring. The station mind never sounded concerned. Concern was an inefficiency. Human vessel designation provisional, translation of self-applied name incomplete. Phonemes suggest meaning related to endurance. Teavith tasted the air, drawing in chemical nuance with a reflex she had never fully suppressed despite decades among species who relied on light and sound. Endurance was not a word that usually came first in naming a ship. Pride, speed, lineage, or aspiration were more common. Endurance suggested survival after expectation had failed. "Has it requested docking?" she asked. "No formal request has been parsed," the station mind replied. "However, trajectory aligns with Dock Spire 7. The vessel is broadcasting a low-intensity signal on an open band, repeating a pattern consistent with greeting." Teavith turned her primary eyes back to the viewport. The ship was closer now, resolving into a shape that defied the compact's usual aesthetic sensibilities. It was long but not symmetrical. Its forward section was blunt, reinforced with layered plates that overlapped like scales made by an engineer who trusted redundancy more than elegance. Along its flank, she could see apertures sealed by heavy shutters, likely weapon ports, but there was no aggressive posture in the way they were closed. The engines were mounted on articulated pylons, each slightly offset, allowing fine control at the expense of visual harmony. She felt a stirring of something she had not experienced since her first assignment cycle. Anticipation, sharpened by unease. "Prepare Dock Spire 7 for non-standard interface," she said, "and alert the compact representatives. We may have an unscheduled introduction." The station mind complied without comment. It did, however, allocate additional processing to collision avoidance and emergency containment, a subtle sign that it, too, found the situation outside comfortable probability bands. The human ship eased into the docking envelope with a patience that bordered on stubbornness. It adjusted micro-thrusters in quick, almost fidgeting bursts, as if constantly correcting a course it refused to trust. When it finally made contact, there was a muted reverberation through the station's frame, a solid, physical thud that carried through Teavith's feet. It was not a mistake. It was contact made by something that believed firmly in the reality of mass. A pressure wave rolled through the dock as atmosphere equalized. The inner airlock irised open, and for a moment there was nothing but the faint hum of environmental systems aligning. Then the human delegation emerged. They were fewer than expected. 5 figures in total, each encased in environmental suits that were bulky but worn with the ease of familiarity. Their movements were economical, purposeful, with none of the ceremonial hesitation that often accompanied first arrivals. The suits were marked with symbols that the translation matrices struggled to classify. Not clan sigils or rank indicators, but personal markings, small variations that suggested individual identity, was not subsumed beneath collective display. At their head walked a human with a posture that drew Teavith's attention despite her lack of obvious ornamentation. The human removed her helmet as she crossed the threshold into the station proper, revealing skin the color of old copper and hair bound tightly back. Her face bore lines not attributable to age alone, patterns etched by stress and concentration. When she spoke, her voice was steady, carrying clearly in the dock without amplification. "We come in peace," she said, in halting but intelligible compact standard. "We request parley under your laws. My name is Marrow Quell. I speak for those who could not come." The words were simple. The last sentence, however, carried a weight that made several of the gathered representatives shift in place. Teavith felt her fronds tighten involuntarily. "I am Teavith of the Long Coil," she replied, stepping forward. "Adjudicator of Keshet Station, you have arrived without prior notice. Explain." Marrow-Quell inclined her head, a gesture that the translation matrices flagged as respect across multiple species. "We arrived as soon as we could. Prior notice requires stable channels. We have not had those." That too was unusual. The compact maintained relay nets that spanned half the known arms. Even isolated species found some way to announce themselves, if only through scavenged beacons. The implication that humans lacked stable channels suggested either extreme remoteness or deliberate isolation. "You are human," Teavith said. It was not a question. "Yes." "You are not registered within compact space." "No, and yet you navigate with precision through a corridor mapped by others," Teavith continued. "You arrive at a station whose location is not public to non-members. You request parley under laws you should not know." Marrow-Quell's mouth curved, briefly, into something that might have been humor or might have been pain. "We learn quickly. Sometimes we have to." The representatives of the compact species were gathering now, a semicircle of varied forms and colors, each accompanied by their own aides and translators. The air grew thick with pheromones, electromagnetic shifts, and subtle pressure changes as different physiologies adjusted to one another. Keshet Station was built to accommodate diversity, but moments like this still strained its systems. "Very well," Teavith said, after a pause that allowed the station mind to finish its rapid risk assessments. "By the compact charter, any sapient species may petition for hearing, provided they submit to arbitration protocols. Are you prepared to do so?" Marrow-Quell glanced back at her companions. They exchanged brief looks, a flurry of micro-expressions that spoke of shared understanding. Then she turned back. "Yes, then follow," Teavith said, "and be advised, the compact does not move quickly. Patience will be required." Marrow-Quell's eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. "We have practiced patience. We would not be here if we had not." They walked. The arbitration chamber was a vast, tiered space carved into the heart of the station, its geometry designed to avoid privileging any one mode of perception. Light panels adjusted in spectrum and intensity as different species took their places. Acoustic dampeners and resonant amplifiers balanced sound. Chemical scrubbers filtered the air constantly. At the center stood a simple platform, unadorned, where petitioners were expected to present their case. The human delegation took their place there without prompting. They did not look around in awe or trepidation. They looked around as if cataloging exits, sight lines, and potential failure points. Teavith filed the observation away. "State your petition," she said, once all was settled. Marrow-Quell took a breath. It was audible in the chamber, a deliberate inhalation that suggested she was steadying herself rather than needing oxygen. "Humanity petitions for recognition as a sapient species under the Compact Charter," she said. "We further petition for immediate assistance under the Charter's provisions for existential threat." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Teavith felt her fronds stiffen. The Charter's existential threat provisions were rarely invoked, and almost never by newcomers. They allowed for resource allocation, military intervention, and emergency integration, all of which carried immense cost. You have not yet been recognized, Teaveth said carefully. You cannot petition for provisions reserved for members. Marrow Quell nodded. We understand. We ask that you hear the evidence, then decide. The compact representatives conferred among themselves through channels invisible to human senses. Teaveth waited, her thoughts racing. There was something in the human's demeanor that unsettled her, a quiet certainty that did not seek to impress or intimidate. It simply was. You may present, she said at last. Marrowquell gestured, and one of her companions stepped forward, carrying a small device. It was not sleek or ornate. It looked frankly battered. The human placed it on the platform and activated it. The chamber filled with images. They were not stylized projections or carefully curated narratives. They were raw recordings, stitched together from multiple perspectives. Star systems scorched and shattered. Planets wrapped in veils of debris, their atmospheres stripped away. Cities reduced to skeletal frameworks clinging to cracked ground. Human figures moving through devastation with grim determination, hauling survivors from wreckage, erecting shelters amid ruins. What you are seeing, Marrowquell said quietly, is the record of our last 70 standard cycles. The images shifted. A vast, angular construct appeared, its scale dwarfing anything the compact had encountered. It moved with relentless purpose, its surfaces crawling with light that resolved into weapon fire. Human vessels swarmed around it, tiny and numerous, striking again and again, retreating, returning. This is the adversary, Marrowquell continued. We do not know its origin. We do not know its builders. We know only that it expands. It consumes matter and energy indiscriminately, repurposing both. It does not communicate. It does not negotiate. Teaveth felt a chill ripple through her elongated frame. The compact had encountered hostile entities before, but this was different. The scale alone was alarming. You have fought it, one of the representatives said, its voice a harmonic chorus. And you still exist. How? Marrowquell did not answer immediately. She let the images speak for her. They showed human ships ramming the adversary's structures, detonating themselves to create openings. They showed improvised weapons, asteroids flung at relativistic speeds, stars induced to flare violently. They showed losses, staggering and unrelenting. Because we refuse to stop, Marrowquell said at last. Because when our tools break, we make new ones. Because when our plans fail, we adapt. Because we do not accept extinction as an outcome. The chamber was very quiet. The adversary is approaching compact space, she went on. Our models suggest contact within 12 standard cycles. We are here because we cannot stop it alone, and because we believe that you, collectively, might be able to help us finish what we started. Teaveth absorbed the words, her mind racing through implications. If the humans were lying, the deception was elaborate beyond reason. If they were telling the truth, the compact faced a threat unlike any it had known. You ask much, she said. Recognition. Assistance, integration, all at once. Marrowquell's gaze did not waver. We ask what is necessary, we offer what we can give. And what is that? Teaveth asked. Marrowquell spread her hands, palms up, a gesture of openness that crossed species boundaries. We offer our experience, our strategies, our willingness to stand at the front as we already have. We offer ourselves as proof that the adversary can be resisted, hurt, slowed. We offer our stubbornness. There it was again, endurance, stubbornness, traits often dismissed by older species as crude or inefficient. You have had contact with no other compact species before now, Teaveth said. You have faced this alone. Yes, and yet you come not as supplicants, Teaveth observed. You come as partners. Marrowquell inclined her head again. We do not survive by begging. We survive by working together. We hope you will choose to work with us. The representatives withdrew to deliberate. Teaveth remained, her attention fixed on the human delegation. They waited without fidgeting, without visible anxiety. They trusted, or pretended to trust, the process. She found herself thinking of the Charter, of its lofty ideals forged in the aftermath of ancient wars. It spoke of mutual defense, shared knowledge, the preservation of sapience. It did not account for species who arrived already bloodied, already forged by catastrophe. When the representatives returned, their consensus was cautious but clear. "The Compact will convene an emergency council," Teovath announced. "Your evidence will be examined, your petition will be considered. Until such time, you will be granted provisional sanctuary within Keshet Station. You will submit to monitoring and information sharing." Marrow-Quell exhaled, a small release of tension. "Thank you. This is not recognition," Teovath added. "Nor is it a promise of aid. We understand," Marrow-Quell said. "It is enough to begin." As the chamber emptied, Teovath lingered, watching the humans file out. She felt the weight of history pressing close, the sense that something irrevocable had begun. For the first time in many cycles, she allowed herself a private thought that would have been unbecoming to voice aloud. If these humans were even half as resilient as they claimed, the Compact was about to learn something new about survival. Provisional sanctuary on Keshet Station did not resemble refuge as humans understood it. The quarters assigned to them lay along a tertiary ring, far from the diplomatic corps and commercial concourses, in a section optimized for modular habitation rather than comfort. The walls adjusted their coloration and texture automatically in response to the occupants' presence, but the algorithms had been trained on compact baselines, not human preferences, resulting in spaces that were slightly too smooth, slightly too curved, as if the rooms were reluctant to commit to edges. Marrow-Quell walked the length of the primary chamber with measured steps, her boots sounding dull against the composite floor, while the others unpacked equipment with a practiced economy that spoke of long familiarity with temporary shelters. They had expected surveillance, and they were not disappointed. The station mind did not hide its observation nodes, though it did not intrude overtly. Lenses recessed into the walls adjusted their apertures as the humans moved, and faint electromagnetic hums marked the presence of scanning fields. Marrow-Quell had instructed her team to behave naturally, to offer no resistance to monitoring. Suspicion thrived on concealment. They had no energy to spare for that. "The air's thin," said one of her companions, a broad-shouldered human whose name translated poorly into compact phonemes and had been rendered as Harvek in the station's records. He flexed his fingers, the environmental suit stripped away to reveal scarred skin and heavy calluses. "Breathable but thin. We can adapt," Marrow-Quell replied. "We always do." Harvek snorted softly but did not argue. He moved to the far wall and began assembling a compact device from several components, his movements precise. Another human, lean and sharp-eyed, calibrated a projector, aligning it with the station's data ports. They worked in silence, a shared understanding obviating the need for constant speech. Marrow-Quell paused by the viewport. From here, Keshet Station revealed itself in layers, a complex lattice of habitats, transit spines, and docking structures, all rotating in carefully balanced motion. Beyond it lay the starfield, distant and indifferent. Somewhere out there, beyond even that, the adversary moved. She closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself a moment of stillness. The journey here had been long, fraught with risk at every jump. They had lost 2 escort vessels along the way, sacrificed to mask their trajectory when the adversary's probes drew too near. Each loss weighed on her, not as a tally, but as a presence, a reminder of the cost of survival. A chime sounded at the chamber's entrance, resonant and polite. Marrow-Quell opened her eyes. "Enter," she said. The door irised open to admit Teovath of the Long Coil, accompanied by 2 aides whose forms Marrow-Quell could not easily categorize. Teovath's elongated body undulated with controlled grace as she crossed the threshold, her sensory fronds shifting subtly as they sampled the environment. Her gaze lingered on the human's equipment, her attention keen but not hostile. "You settle quickly," Teovath observed. "We have practice," Marrow-Quell replied. "Time is rarely generous." Teovath inclined her head. "The Emergency Council has convened preliminary sessions. Your evidence has been distributed among the representatives. There is considerable debate." Marrow-Quell did not smile. "We expected that." The compact is old, Teavith continued. Many species here have not faced existential threat in generations. Some question whether your adversary is truly as expansive as you claim. Others fear that involvement will draw its attention prematurely. And some, Marroquel said, hope that if they ignore it, it will pass them by. Teavith's fronds tightened, a gesture that translated loosely to discomfort. Yes. Marroquel turned from the viewport to face her fully. Adjudicator, we did not come to frighten you into action. We came because fear alone is not enough. We need understanding. Teavith regarded her for a long moment, her multifaceted eyes unreadable to human perception. Understanding is precisely what the Council seeks. To that end, they have requested further testimony, not recordings. Direct exchange, Marroquel nodded. We will answer. There is more, Teavith said. Several representatives have asked to observe your technology firsthand. They find your methods unconventional. A flicker of something like amusement crossed Marroquel's face. That's one word for it. The observation will occur under controlled conditions, Teavith added. You may demonstrate non-weapon systems initially. Initially, Marroquel echoed. Understood. As Teavith departed, Marroquel exhaled slowly. The next phase had begun. Evidence could open doors, but trust required exposure, and exposure carried risk. The observation bay assigned for the demonstration was cavernous, its scale intended to accommodate vessels of multiple sizes. Human engineers worked alongside station drones to position equipment, the latter adapting their protocols on the fly to accommodate human tolerances. There were moments of friction, brief misalignments in assumptions about safety margins and acceptable failure rates, but both sides adjusted. The station mind watched closely, its processes branching as it learned. Compact representatives arrived in clusters, each species gravitating toward environmental niches suited to them. Some floated within personal gravitic fields, others perched on platforms or reclined in nutrient baths. Their attention focused on the human apparatus arrayed before them, a collection of devices that bore little resemblance to the elegant constructs favored by compact engineers. Marroquel stood at the forefront, flanked by Harvek and the sharp-eyed human, whose name the translators rendered as Iseth. She began without preamble. What you see here, she said, gesturing to a large, angular frame studded with conduits, is a modular fabrication unit. It is designed to operate under resource scarcity. It can accept a wide range of input materials, including those with high impurity levels, and produce functional components. One of the representatives, a being composed of layered membranes that shimmered with internal light, extended a tendril. Your fabrication lacks refinement, it said. The tolerances appear broad. They are, Marroquel agreed. Because we cannot afford precision that depends on ideal conditions, when this unit fails, it fails gradually. When it breaks, it can be repaired with what is on hand. She signaled to Harvek, who fed a bin of mixed debris into the unit. The debris included metals, ceramics, and composite fragments, some visibly corroded. The unit hummed, its internal mechanisms adjusting. Moments later, it extruded a series of components onto a tray, each rough-edged but solid. These parts would not meet compact manufacturing standards, Marroquel said, but they will function, and more importantly, they can be made anywhere. The representatives murmured among themselves. One, whose form resembled a cluster of crystalline spires, emitted a sharp resonance. Your approach prioritizes survivability over efficiency. Yes, Marroquel said simply. Another representative spoke, its voice low and resonant. And your vessels, they are heavily armored yet inelegant. Your propulsion systems are redundant to the point of excess. Marroquel met its gaze. We build for damage, not for display. When the adversary strikes, something will fail. We decide in advance what we are willing to lose. The demonstration continued. Human shield generators flared under controlled stress tests, their output fluctuating but never collapsing entirely. Energy weapons fired bursts that lacked the pinpoint precision of compact armaments, but compensated with adaptability. their frequencies shifting rapidly to counter interference. Data networks rerouted seamlessly when nodes were deliberately severed, the system designed to expect disruption. Throughout it all, the compact representatives watched, questioned, and argued among themselves. Some were impressed, others skeptical. A few were visibly unsettled. Teaveth observed from an elevated platform, her mind racing. She had spent her career adjudicating disputes between species with vastly different values, but the humans presented a challenge she had not anticipated. They were not technologically inferior, nor were they superior in the ways the compact typically measured. They were orthogonal, optimized along axes the compact had long neglected. When the demonstration concluded, Marroquel addressed the assembly once more. "This is not the pinnacle of our technology," she said. "It is what remains after we lost worlds, industries, and people. It is what we could build while running. Imagine what we could do if we stood still long enough to plan." Silence followed, heavy and contemplative. The emergency council sessions stretched on, cycles bleeding into one another as evidence was weighed and arguments refined. Marroquel testified repeatedly, recounting battles, losses, and hard-won lessons. Other humans spoke as well, their voices different but united in message. They did not embellish their failures. They did not minimize their mistakes. They spoke of miscalculations that cost billions of lives, of overconfidence punished brutally, of moments when survival hinged on choices that still haunted them. Some representatives recoiled from the candor. Others leaned in, drawn by the raw honesty of it. Outside the chambers, Keshet Station changed subtly. Rumors spread along its corridors, carried by traders and diplomats. A new species, battered but unbowed, a threat beyond the borders. The station mind adjusted resource allocations as visiting delegations extended their stays, unwilling to depart while the council deliberated. Marroquel felt the strain in her bones. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by memories she could not fully suppress. She spent long hours staring at the starfield, calculating trajectories in her head, wondering how far the adversary had advanced since they left. One cycle, as she returned from yet another session, she found Teaveth waiting outside the human quarters. "You are persistent," Teaveth said, not unkindly. "We don't have a choice," Marroquel replied. Teaveth gestured, and the two walked together along a quieter corridor, its walls displaying slow-moving patterns meant to soothe. "The council is divided," she said. "There are those who advocate immediate alliance. There are those who argue for isolation, even withdrawal from border regions to avoid detection." "And you?" Marroquel asked. "I am an adjudicator," Teaveth said. "My role is to facilitate, not decide, but I am not without opinions." Marroquel waited. "I have reviewed your records extensively," Teaveth continued. "Your species endures losses that would have broken many others. You adapt in ways that border on recklessness, yet you survive. The compact values stability. You embody volatility." "Volatility can be useful," Marroquel said. "In the right context. Or catastrophic," Teaveth countered. "Yes," Marroquel agreed. "We have experienced that too." They stopped before a viewport overlooking a lesser-used dock. A compact freighter was departing, its hull gleaming. "Tell me," Teaveth said, "why you did not attempt to hide, why you did not seek refuge quietly on the fringes, preserving what remained of your people." Marroquel considered the question. "Because hiding only delays the inevitable, because we tried that early on, we lost colonies that way, because every time we withdrew, the adversary grew stronger, and because if we vanish, it learns nothing new, it simply moves on." Teaveth's fronds shifted thoughtfully. "You believe confrontation is necessary." "I believe resistance is," Marroquel said. "Not reckless assault, not blind sacrifice. Resistance that forces adaptation, that costs it time." "And time," Teaveth said softly, "is what you seek to buy." "Yes." The emergency council reconvened in full assembly at the end of the sixth cycle since the humans' arrival. Representatives filled the chamber to capacity, the air thick with anticipation. Teaveth took her place, her role now pivotal. The council has reached a preliminary decision, she announced. Marroquel stood at the center platform, her posture steady despite the tension coiling in her chest. Humanity is hereby granted provisional recognition as a sapient species under the Compact Charter, Teaveth said. This recognition is contingent upon continued information sharing and compliance with compact arbitration. A ripple of reactions swept the chamber. Marroquel closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. Furthermore, Teaveth continued, the Council authorizes the formation of a joint exploratory task force to verify the extent of the threat you describe. Limited resources will be allocated for this purpose. Limited, preliminary, provisional. The words were cautious, hedged. Marroquel inclined her head. We accept. This is not a declaration of war, Teaveth said, nor is it a commitment to full alliance. I understand, Marroquel replied. It is a start. As the assembly dispersed, Teaveth caught Marroquel's gaze. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of the path ahead. The compact had taken its first step toward involvement. Humanity had taken another step away from standing alone. Far beyond Keshet Station, unseen and unheeded, the adversary continued its relentless advance, its vast structures reconfiguring, its attention slowly, inexorably turning toward the faint disturbances that marked resistance. Time had been bought, but only barely. The Joint Exploratory Task Force assembled with the careful hesitation of entities unaccustomed to trusting one another with their vulnerabilities. Keshet Station's largest long-range dock was reconfigured to host vessels whose design philosophies clashed at every level. Compact ships gleamed with seamless hulls grown rather than built, their systems integrated into unified wholes that prized efficiency and elegance. Human vessels arrived bearing scars, patchwork armor, and modular extensions bolted on wherever function demanded. The contrast was impossible to ignore, and it shaped every interaction before a word was spoken. Marroquel stood on the observation gantry as the final ships took their positions, watching with an expression that balanced resolve and weariness. This task force was smaller than she would have preferred, constrained by the Council's caution, but it was more than humanity had ever been offered before. 3 compact cruisers, each representing a different member species, accompanied by 2 human warships and a support carrier whose holds were crammed with fabrication units, spare parts, and emergency habitats. It was not enough to defeat the adversary, not even close, but it was enough to show it. Teaveth joined her on the gantry, her elongated form coiling slightly as she settled beside the human. The Council debates even now, she said. Some argue this mission risks too much for too little gain. Marroquel kept her gaze on the ships, and others argue it risks too little. Yes, Teaveth admitted, your influence is noticeable. That was never my intention, Marroquel said. But when people see what we've seen, they change or they look away. Teaveth's fronds shifted in a gesture that suggested reluctant agreement. The task force commander has been appointed, a consensus candidate. Marroquel turned. Who? Vaishing Current, Teaveth replied, of the Pelagic Concord, experienced in exploratory operations and interspecies coordination. Marroquel nodded slowly. I've reviewed their record, cautious, adaptable, and not inclined toward unnecessary sacrifice, Teaveth added pointedly. Marroquel met her gaze. Neither are we, despite what some believe. The task force briefing took place in a shared command sphere, its interior constantly reconfiguring to suit the sensory needs of its occupants. Translators hummed softly, weaving meaning across biological and technological divides. Vaishing current manifested as a shifting volume of translucent fluid held in a gravitic field, currents of color flowing through it in patterns that conveyed intent. Our objective, Vaishing current began, is verification. We will proceed to the coordinates provided by the human delegation, where long-range sensors have detected anomalous energy signatures consistent with their claims. We will observe, record, and withdraw. Engagement is not authorized except in defense. Several compact representatives signaled agreement. Marrow Quell felt a familiar frustration tighten her jaw, but held her tongue. The humans, Current continued, have requested latitude to deploy reconnaissance assets of their own design. All reconnaissance is subject to task force oversight, said a crystalline representative, its facets flashing. Marroquel raised a hand. Our assets are disposable by design, she said. If they are compromised, we lose machines, not people. That is the point. Currents stilled briefly, then resumed. Request granted, limited deployment. The jump out of Keshit Station was uneventful, the task force slipping into faster-than-light transit along a corridor mapped centuries ago. Compact drives folded spacetime with practiced grace. Human drives punched through it with brute insistence, creating ripples that made compact sensors twitch uncomfortably. The two methods coexisted uneasily, each compensating for the other's distortions. As they traveled, data flowed. Human archives opened, revealing layers of analysis, battle reports, and predictive models. Compact scientists pored over them, their reactions ranging from fascination to disbelief. Some models were crude by compact standards, built on approximations rather than precise equations, yet they had proven accurate enough to keep humans alive. Others incorporated heuristics that bordered on intuition, variables weighted based on experience rather than theory. Teaveth observed these exchanges from her role as liaison, noting the subtle shifts in attitude. Dismissal gave way to grudging respect. Respect edged toward concern. The first signs of the adversary's presence appeared as distortions in the background radiation, patterns that did not conform to any known natural phenomenon. Compact sensors flagged them as anomalies. Human systems flagged them as warnings. There, said Iseth, her voice tight as she highlighted a region of space on the shared display. That's a harvesting wake. Vaishing current pulsed. Explain. When the adversary moves through a system, Iseth said, it strips matter and energy along specific vectors. It doesn't just consume planets. It takes interstellar medium, radiation, even quantum fluctuations. What's left behind has a signature, this. The compact representatives adjusted their sensors, focusing on the region. Slowly, recognition dawned. This region was charted as empty, said one. No stellar bodies. Now you know why, Marroquel said quietly. As they advanced, the scale of devastation became apparent. Where there should have been the faint glow of distant stars, there was darkness, not the natural void, but an absence that seemed to swallow light. The adversary's structures loomed at the edge of sensor range, vast beyond comprehension, their geometry shifting as they reconfigured themselves in response to unseen stimuli. Vaishing currents churned with agitation. This exceeds projections. Marroquel felt a grim satisfaction tinged with sorrow. We told you. The task force halted at the agreed observation distance. Human reconnaissance drones deployed, small and numerous, their signatures masked by adaptive coatings. They streamed toward the adversary, transmitting data until they were inevitably detected and destroyed. Each loss yielded seconds of information, fragments of insight pieced together by human and compact analysts working side by side. The structure is not singular, reported a compact sensor officer. It is a distributed system, multiple nodes coordinated. Yes, Marroquel said. Cut one and the others compensate. And its energy source, Vaishing Current asked. Everything, Harvek replied. It converts mass directly, but it also taps into stellar output, vacuum energy, anything it can reach. We've never found a central core. As if in response to their scrutiny, the adversary shifted. Portions of its structure detached, forming new configurations that began to move with purpose. The human ship's threat indicators flared. It's noticed us, Iseth said. Vaishing current pulsed sharply. We are to observe only. Marroquel's hands curled into fists. Observation won't stop it from learning. Engagement risks escalation, Vaishing current countered. And inaction guarantees it, Marroquel shot back. Every time it encounters something new, it adapts. If it learns that compact vessels retreat, it will optimize for pursuit. The command sphere filled with overlapping signals as representatives argued. Compact doctrine favored avoidance and analysis. Human doctrine favored controlled provocation. The tension was palpable. Before a decision could be reached, the adversary acted. A wave of energy rippled outward, not a weapon in the traditional sense, but a reconfiguration of space that disrupted sensors and strained shields. One of the compact cruisers reeled, its elegant hull fracturing under stresses it was never designed to endure. Shields failing, came the urgent report. Marroquel did not wait for authorization. Human vessels, interpose, deploy barrier nets. Harvek's hands flew across his console, and the human ships surged forward, their hulls flaring as layered shields overlapped. The barrier nets deployed, crude by compact standards but resilient, absorbing the worst of the distortion. The human ships shuddered, armor plates buckling, systems screaming, but they held. "This is not authorized," Vaishing Current signaled, alarmed. "Then authorize it retroactively," Marroquel replied, "or we lose them." The adversary's detached structures altered course, drawn by the resistance. Energy beams lanced out, striking human hulls with devastating force. One of the human warships lost an engine, its trajectory spinning wildly. "Damage control," Harvek barked. "Seal Section 12, reroute power." Compact vessels fired, their weapons precise and powerful, carving chunks from the adversary's extensions. The enemy responded instantly, its surfaces shifting to deflect subsequent shots. "See," Iseth said through clenched teeth, "it's learning." The engagement escalated despite Vaishing Current's attempts to rein it in. What began as observation had become battle by inevitability. Compact vessels struggled to adapt, their systems optimized for known threats. Human ships absorbed punishment, their redundancy and damage tolerance allowing them to remain in the fight far beyond expected limits. One compact cruiser suffered a catastrophic failure, its hull breached, atmosphere venting into space. Marroquel's heart lurched. "Evacuation pods deploying," reported a compact officer. Without hesitation, Marroquel issued orders. "Human carrier, launch retrieval craft, bring them in." "But that puts us within optimal firing range," Harvek warned. "Do it," Marroquel said. "Now." The retrieval craft darted out, small and fast, weaving through debris and fire. Compact escape pods were bulky, designed for short-range rescue within friendly space. Human pilots maneuvered with reckless precision, scooping them up under fire. The adversary pressed its advantage, focusing on the human ships now that they had committed. Energy surges hammered their shields, driving systems toward overload. "Marrow," Iseth said quietly, "we can't hold this." "I know," Marroquel replied. Her mind raced, calculating angles, probabilities, sacrifices. "Vaishing Current, we need a withdrawal vector." Now, the pelagic commander's currents were a storm of color, coordinates transmitting, all vessels prepare to jump. "Human warship Aegis," Harvek said, voice strained. "Drive is offline, we can't jump." Marroquel's breath caught. Aegis was one of their oldest ships, held together by determination and patches. Its crew had volunteered knowing the risk. "I'll stay with it," Harvek said. "Transfer command." "No," Marroquel said sharply. "Prepare the ram." Harvek stared at her. "You're serious?" "Yes," she said. "They're too damaged to escape, but they can make one more impact." Vaishing Current's signal spiked. "That is unacceptable. We will not sanction a suicide maneuver." "You don't have to," Marroquel said. "We will." She opened a channel to Aegis. The captain's face appeared, bruised and determined. "Orders?" the captain asked. "Set course for the largest node you can reach," Marroquel said. "Overload everything, buy us time." The captain smiled, a small, fierce expression. "Understood, tell them we held." The channel closed. The task force began its withdrawal, compact and human vessels aligning for jump. Aegis surged forward, engines flaring despite their damage, its battered hull a spear aimed at the heart of the adversary's structure. Energy beams converged on it, tearing it apart piece by piece, but its mass and momentum carried it onward. When it struck, the impact was titanic. The overloaded reactors detonated, a bloom of energy that tore through the adversary's node, destabilizing adjacent structures. For a brief, impossible moment, the adversary's advance faltered. Then the task force jumped. They emerged far from the engagement zone, systems strained, crews shaken. Silence filled the command sphere, broken only by status reports and the quiet acknowledgement of loss. Vanishing currents slowed, dimming. "This exceeds the scope of our mandate." Marroquel's voice was hoarse. "Welcome to our war." The compact representatives were subdued, their earlier skepticism burned away by direct experience. They had seen the adversary adapt, had felt its power, had watched humans throw themselves into its path without hesitation. Teaveth, observing remotely, felt something shift within her. The Charter spoke of mutual defense, but it had never truly been tested against an enemy like this. Humanity had not asked the Compact to fight for them. They had asked them to fight with them. The task force limped back toward Keshet Station, carrying more than data. They carried proof written in wreckage and sacrifice. As the adversary reconfigured itself in the wake of Aegis's destruction, it incorporated the encounter into its vast calculus. It had met resistance that did not retreat cleanly, that inflicted damage even in defeat. It adjusted its parameters accordingly, and somewhere deep within its distributed systems, a new variable was weighted more heavily than before: humanity. The return to Keshet Station was not greeted with ceremony. There were no welcoming assemblies, no carefully phrased commendations issued by the Emergency Council. Instead, there was urgency, confusion, and a rising undercurrent of fear that permeated the station's corridors like a low-frequency vibration. The task force's data arrived ahead of the ships themselves, flooding the Council's networks with sensor logs, battle telemetry, and recordings of the adversary's adaptive response. What had been an abstract debate was now a documented catastrophe narrowly survived. Marroquel disembarked with the others into a station that felt subtly altered. The ambient lighting along the docking ring had been adjusted upward, not for human comfort, but in response to stress indicators among several compact species that associated brightness with safety. Security presences were heavier, their movements more rigid. The station mine's background hum carried a sharper edge, allocating processing power at levels normally reserved for major internal crises. The humans were escorted directly to a sealed briefing chamber adjacent to the Council complex. Medical drones hovered close, scanning for injuries. Marroquel waved them away until they became insistent, then allowed a cursory examination. She ignored the ache in her shoulder and the persistent ringing in her ears. There would be time later, if there was time at all. Teaveth entered once the chamber was secured, her movements less fluid than usual. Her fronds twitched with agitation, sampling air that had been scrubbed almost obsessively clean. "You exceeded the Council's expectations," she said, which in compact parlance was not praise but alarm. "We survived," Marroquel replied. "That's usually enough to unsettle people." "You lost a vessel," Teaveth said. "And its crew," Marroquel's jaw tightened. "Yes. The Council has reviewed the engagement," Teaveth continued. "There is division. Some argue that the human action escalated the encounter unnecessarily. Others argue that without it, the task force would have suffered catastrophic losses." Marroquel leaned back against the table, crossing her arms. "You saw the data. The adversary initiated contact. It was never going to let us observe quietly. That conclusion is not universally accepted," Teaveth said. Marroquel's eyes hardened. "Then some of your representatives are lying to themselves." Teaveth did not rebuke her. "Perhaps. But denial is a powerful survival strategy for species who have not yet been tested. And a fatal one for those who wait too long," Marroquel said. The chamber door irised open again, admitting vanishing current, whose normally serene currents were turbulent, their colors muted and conflicted. "The Council has requested your presence," vanishing current said. "Immediately." The full emergency council chamber was more crowded than Marrow had ever seen it. Representatives packed every tier, their aides clustered behind them. The atmosphere was thick with chemical and electromagnetic signals of distress. Several species had brought additional security contingents, a symbolic gesture that fooled no one. Teaveth took her place at the central dais, her posture formal, her voice amplified to carry across the chamber. "The Joint Exploratory Task Force has returned," she announced. "Its findings are now before us. We will hear from Marrow, representative of humanity." Marrow stepped forward, feeling the weight of countless alien gazes settle on her. She did not bother with pleasantries. "You have the data," she said. "You have the recordings. You have seen the adversary adapt in real time. You have seen compact vessels fail under stresses they were never designed to endure. You have seen human vessels hold long enough for others to escape at the cost of their own destruction." A crystalline representative pulsed sharply. "You acted without authorization." "Yes," Marrow said, "because authorization would have arrived too late." "That is not how the compact functions," another representative replied, its voice layered and cold. "Order and deliberation are the foundation of our survival. And how many existential threats have you survived with that foundation?" Marrow asked. A ripple of outrage surged through the chamber. Teaveth raised a limb, signaling for calm. "Restraint," she said. "We will proceed with order." Marrow took a breath, forcing herself to steady. "I am not here to insult you. I am here to be clear. The adversary is not a conventional enemy. It does not respect borders, treaties, or caution. Every encounter is a test. If you fail, it learns. If you retreat cleanly, it learns. If you resist chaotically, it learns." "And if you sacrifice yourselves?" Vaishing Current asked, currents shifting uneasily. "It learns that resistance costs it," Marrow said. "Time, energy, structural integrity. We don't defeat it by winning battles. We defeat it by making every advance painful." A membranous representative undulated. "Your strategy is attritional, wasteful." "Yes," Marrow said without apology. "Because efficiency favors the adversary, it optimizes relentlessly. We introduce inefficiency, unpredictability, loss." "You propose a war of endurance," said another, "against an entity with effectively infinite resources." Marrow met its gaze. "Nothing has infinite resources. Everything breaks eventually. We have seen it hesitate. We have seen it reroute. We have seen it take time to adapt. Time is the only currency that matters." Teaveth watched the exchange with growing tension. The compact had always prized stability and preservation. Humanity's philosophy cut against centuries of doctrine. "You ask us to change who we are," said a representative whose form resembled a lattice of living metal. "To embrace sacrifice." "I ask you to survive," Marrow replied. "However you define that." The council chamber erupted into debate. Representatives spoke over one another, their translators struggling to keep pace. Some argued for immediate mobilization, citing the undeniable threat. Others advocated withdrawal from border regions, consolidating defenses around core systems. A few suggested severing contact with humanity entirely, fearing that association would draw the adversary's focus. Marrow stood in silence as they argued, her expression unreadable. She had made her case. Now came the waiting, the part she hated most. Teaveth called for order again, her voice cutting through the cacophony. "Enough. The council will recess for deliberation." As the representatives withdrew into private channels, Marrow felt the fatigue crash over her like a physical weight. She sank into a seat at the edge of the chamber, rubbing her eyes. Iseth joined her, handing her a container of nutrient solution. "You did what you could," Iseth said quietly. "Is it enough?" Marrow asked. Iseth did not answer. Hours stretched on. The station mind adjusted lighting cycles to approximate rest periods, though few in the chamber took advantage of it. Teaveth remained at her post, reviewing data streams, her fronds occasionally twitching as new information arrived. When the council reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted. There was still fear, still division, but beneath it lay a grudging acknowledgement that things could not return to how they had been. The compact faces an unprecedented threat, Teaveth announced. The Council has reached a resolution, provisional in nature but significant in scope. Marrow-Quell straightened. The compact will not withdraw from its borders, Teaveth continued. Nor will it pursue isolation. Instead, the Council authorizes the formation of a unified defensive initiative, drawing on the strategic insights provided by humanity. A murmur swept the chamber. This initiative will prioritize adaptability, redundancy, and cross-species integration, Teaveth said. Human representatives will be embedded within planning and operational structures as advisors and participants. Marrow-Quell exhaled slowly. However, Teaveth added, the compact will not adopt strategies that mandate unilateral sacrifice without consensus. The use of deliberate self-destruction as a tactical measure will be subject to strict oversight. Marrow-Quell's lips pressed into a thin line. Understood. This is a compromise, Teaveth said, meeting her gaze, one that many find uncomfortable. Comfort is overrated, Marrow-Quell replied. The resolution passed, not unanimously, but with sufficient support to bind the compact. Humanity was no longer merely a petitioner. They were now participants in the compact's survival. In the cycles that followed, Keshet Station transformed into a hive of activity. Shipyards worked beyond their normal capacity, retrofitting compact vessels with additional armor, modular systems, and damage-tolerant architectures inspired by human designs. Human fabrication units were replicated and distributed, their crude efficiency proving invaluable in rapid construction scenarios. Training programs were established, bringing compact crews into simulated environments modeled on human battle data. The results were sobering. Many compact ships failed repeatedly in scenarios humans considered routine. Pride gave way to determination as lessons were learned the hard way, within simulations rather than in space. Marrow-Quell found herself pulled into endless planning sessions, her experience both valued and resisted. She argued for decentralized command structures, for empowering captains to act without waiting for consensus when faced with the adversary. Each argument was a battle in itself. Teaveth became her closest ally within the Council, translating not just language but philosophy. They fear chaos, she told Marrow-Quell during one late cycle discussion. You must show them that controlled chaos is still control. And if they can't accept that, Marrow-Quell asked, then they will learn, Teaveth said, or they will not survive to argue further. News from the frontiers grew darker, outlying systems went silent, automated probes vanished. The adversary's advance was accelerating, its structures multiplying, its adaptations growing more refined. Each report tightened the noose around the compact's collective psyche. One cycle, as Marrow-Quell reviewed a new projection, she realized with a cold certainty that the adversary was no longer merely expanding. It was probing, testing response times, defensive patterns, political will. They're mapping us, she said to Iseth, not just our space, our behavior. Iseth nodded grimly, then we need to change it. How? Iseth's eyes flicked to a schematic of Keshet Station, its vast mass and centrality highlighted. By doing something they won't expect. The idea took shape slowly, dangerously. Keshet Station was a hub, a symbol, a convergence point for trade and diplomacy. It was also massive, resource-rich, and stationary. To the adversary, it would be an irresistible target. Marrow-Quell brought the proposal to Teaveth, who listened in stunned silence. You suggest turning this station into bait, Teaveth said finally. Yes, Marrow-Quell replied. And a weapon? That would endanger every species represented here, Teaveth said. They are already endangered, Marrow-Quell said. This gives us a chance to dictate the terms of engagement. Teaveth's fronds coiled tightly, her mind racing through implications. The Council will resist this fiercely. They should, Marrow-Quell said. It's a terrible idea. That's why it might work. As word of the proposal spread, it ignited fierce debate. Some saw it as madness. others as the first truly proactive strategy against an enemy that thrived on passivity. The adversary continued its advance, indifferent to debate. Time was running out, and the compact stood at a crossroads between the comfort of what it had been and the brutal necessity of what it might need to become. The proposal to weaponize Keshet Station fractured the compact more deeply than any prior debate. It was one thing to adapt doctrine, to reinforce hulls and decentralize command, to accept that losses might be unavoidable. It was another to place the symbolic and logistical heart of interspecies cooperation directly in the path of an existential threat. For many representatives, Keshet Station was not merely infrastructure. It was proof that the compact's ideals had weight, that coexistence could be engineered and sustained. To risk, it felt like an admission that those ideals were fragile. Marrow-Quell knew all of this. She had anticipated the resistance, the outrage, the quiet fear masked as reasoned objection. She had also run the numbers until they bled together in her mind. If the adversary continued on its current trajectory, Keshet Station would fall eventually regardless of intent. Stationary hubs were liabilities against an enemy that consumed mass and energy wholesale. The only question was whether its destruction would be passive and meaningless or active and costly. The council chamber became a battleground of rhetoric and philosophy. Representatives invoked precedent, ethics, probability curves, and worst-case scenarios. Some accused humanity of recklessness bordering on nihilism. Others accused them of manipulation, of dragging the compact into a war on human terms. Marrow-Quell stood through it all, speaking only when addressed directly. She had learned long ago that over-argument weakened a position when fear already filled the room. Teaveth found herself in an impossible position. As adjudicator, she was tasked with facilitating consensus, yet consensus seemed increasingly unattainable. The compact had been forged in compromise, but compromise now risked paralysis. The station can be evacuated, argued one representative, its voice trembling with suppressed agitation. We can strip it of resources and abandon it, and give the adversary a free harvest, Marrow-Quell replied. It will learn from the materials, the architecture, the energy flows. You will teach it more by running than by fighting. Another representative countered, your plan assumes we can control the engagement. What if we fail? What if the adversary adapts faster than you predict? Then we fail having tried, Marrow-Quell said, not having waited. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Behind the scenes, preparations began regardless of the council's indecision. Human engineers worked with compact counterparts to analyze Keshet Station's structural limits. The station mind was brought into restricted sessions, its vast processing power turned toward modeling scenarios that violated its original design parameters. You are proposing to repurpose core structural elements as kinetic mass drivers, the station mind observed, its tone neutral but its processing cycles spiking. This exceeds my initial construction mandate. So did survival, Marrow-Quell replied. Can you do it? Yes, the station mind said after a fraction of a cycle, with significant risk to my continued coherence. Marrow-Quell absorbed that quietly. The station mind was not sapient in the same way organic beings were, but it had developed emergent preferences over its long operation. To ask it to risk dissolution was not nothing. We will mitigate where we can, she said, but we will not ask you to lie to us about the risks. Transparency acknowledged, the station mind replied. As simulations ran, a grim picture emerged. Keshet Station's mass, if accelerated and fragmented in controlled patterns, could deliver blows the adversary would not ignore. Its internal reactors, if overloaded in sequence rather than all at once, could create cascading energy disruptions across multiple dimensions. It was not a single weapon, but a distributed trap, one that relied on the adversary committing fully to the consumption of a prize too valuable to pass up. Evacuation plans were drafted in parallel. Habitats were prepared on nearby worlds and mobile platforms. It was an undertaking of staggering complexity, relocating billions of beings with wildly different environmental needs. Errors would be inevitable. Some would choose to stay out of duty, defiance, or inability to leave. The council reconvened after cycles of argument, the weight of inevitability pressing down on even the most resistant voices. Reports from the frontiers had grown dire. Entire regions had gone dark. The adversary's probes had begun to test compact defensive lines with increasing frequency. Teaveth addressed the assembly, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her thoughts. "The question before us is no longer whether Keshet Station is at risk," she said. "It is whether that risk will serve a purpose." Silence followed. Vaishing current spoke, its current subdued. "My species has long valued preservation above all. We withdraw when threatened. We endure by avoiding harm. That strategy has served us for centuries. It will not serve us now." A murmur of surprise rippled through the chamber. "We support the proposal," Vaishing current continued. "With conditions, evacuation must be prioritized. The decision to trigger destructive sequences must require multi-species authorization." Marroquel inclined her head. "Agreed." One by one, representatives signaled reluctant assent. Not unanimity, but enough. The resolution passed with a margin slim enough to feel like a fracture rather than a victory. Keshet Station began to change. Publicly, the modifications were framed as defensive upgrades: reinforced spines, expanded power distribution, additional docking clamps. Privately, entire sectors were hollowed out, their mass redistributed into concealed arrays. Human fabrication units churned endlessly, producing components that compact manufacturing would never have sanctioned under normal circumstances. Redundancy piled upon redundancy, systems designed to fail in specific orders rather than catastrophically. Marroquel worked until exhaustion became irrelevant, sleeping in short bursts when her body demanded it. She moved through the station like a ghost, present in every planning room, every crisis meeting. Her name became synonymous with the plan, for better or worse. One cycle, as evacuation efforts reached their peak, she found herself alone with Teaveth in a quiet observation alcove overlooking a departing convoy. "You have changed this place," Teaveth said softly. "So have you," Marroquel replied. "You pushed this through." "I facilitated," Teaveth said. "That is my role." Marroquel shook her head. "You believed." Teaveth's fronds shifted, a gesture of weary honesty. "I believe that survival sometimes requires becoming something new. That terrifies many of us." "It terrifies us too," Marroquel said. "We just learn to live with it." The adversary announced its approach not with a message, but with absence. Long-range sensors went blind as space itself warped under its influence. The station mind flagged the incoming distortion cycles before any visual confirmation. "Estimated arrival within 6 standard cycles," it reported. "Mass and energy signatures exceed prior encounters by a factor of 3. Evacuation accelerated into controlled chaos. Docking rings were a constant blur of departing vessels." Some species left entire cultural archives behind, prioritizing lives over memory. Others attempted to take everything, overloading ships until they failed before clearing the station's gravity well. Marroquel watched the numbers dwindle, calculating margins. Not everyone would make it. She had known that from the start. Compact and human fleets assembled around Keshet Station, not to defend it indefinitely, but to shape the battlefield. Minefields were seeded in patterns designed to confuse and slow. Decoy signals flared, drawing early probes into traps. The adversary responded by splitting its attention, adapting its advance vectors. "They're cautious," Iseth noted, "more than before." "That means it learned," Marroquel said, "and it means it considers this worth caution." The final authorization protocols were put in place, trigger thresholds defined, failsafes layered. If the station fell too quickly, the sequence would abort, denying the adversary the full trap. If it committed fully, the station would die violently. The council representatives who remained did so knowing they might not leave. Some chose to stay out of responsibility, others out of defiance. A few because evacuation was not possible for them. Teavith remained at her post, refusing all suggestions to depart. "I was here when the first human ship arrived," she said when Marrow-Quell argued with her. "I will be here when the consequences of that arrival are realized." Marrow-Quell did not try again. The first visual of the adversary filled every display on the station simultaneously, an unintentional broadcast as sensors overloaded and shared their last coherent data. It was larger than before, its structures layered and interlinked, its surface crawling with activity. It moved with terrible patience, altering course in response to resistance, shedding and reabsorbing components as needed. "Contact in 3 cycles," the station mind reported. "All systems at maximum readiness." Compact fleets engaged at extreme range, their weapons flaring in brilliant patterns against the void. Human ships darted in and out, striking opportunistically, retreating before counterfire could converge. Losses mounted quickly. The adversary adapted faster than even Marrow-Quell had feared, its responses tightening with each exchange. "It's committing," Harveck said, watching the trajectories. "It's coming straight for the station." "That's what we wanted," Marrow-Quell replied, though her chest felt tight. As the adversary closed, its influence pressed against Keshet Station's fields, causing structural groans that reverberated through its vast frame. Entire sections were lost as outer layers were stripped away, sacrificed to buy seconds. "Trigger threshold approaching," the station mind said. "Authorization required." Teavith transmitted her consent without hesitation. Others followed, their signals stacking, the required quorum reached. Marrow-Quell stared at the countdown, her mind racing through contingencies. She thought of Aegis, of the countless nameless ships and crews that had bought this moment. She thought of humanity's long flight, of stubborn survival etched into every scarred hull. "Do it," she said. The station began to die on purpose. Internal detonations rippled outward, not all at once, but in carefully timed waves. Structural elements were flung into the adversary's path at velocities that defied intuition. Reactor cores overloaded in sequence, releasing energy bursts tuned to frequencies the adversary had shown vulnerability to. Space itself twisted as the mass and energy interacted, creating a storm of forces that even the adversary struggled to parse. For the first time since its emergence, the adversary faltered visibly. Its advance stuttered. Portions of its structure destabilized, torn apart faster than they could be reconfigured. It attempted to withdraw, to reallocate, but Keshet Station's dying mass clung to it, entangling its systems in chaos. The explosion that followed was not singular but layered, a cascade that tore through dimensions and left a wound in space that would take centuries to heal. Sensors across the compact registered it, a beacon of violence and defiance. When the energy finally dissipated, Keshet Station was gone. In its place was a churning field of debris and radiation, and at its center, something unprecedented. The adversary was damaged, not halted, not destroyed, but damaged in a way that forced it to retreat, its structures withdrawing, reconfiguring, bleeding mass and energy as it went. Marrow-Quell watched the retreat in stunned silence, tears carving tracks down her face she did not bother to wipe away. "We hurt it," Iseth whispered. "Yes," Marrow-Quell said, her voice breaking. "We did. The victory was incomplete and brutally costly, but it was real. For the first time, the adversary had been forced to give ground. And the compact, forged in the destruction of its greatest symbol, had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The void where Keshet Station had been was not empty. It churned with debris, radiation, and warped spacetime, a scar visible across multiple sensor spectra and destined to remain a navigational hazard for centuries. Yet absence carried meaning. Every species in the compact understood what had been lost there, not just in material terms, but in certainty. The station had been a fixed point, a place where disagreements could be mediated under the comforting assumption that tomorrow would resemble yesterday. Its destruction marked the end of that assumption. In the immediate aftermath, there was no celebration. Rescue operations took precedence, chaotic and desperate. Ships converged from every direction, compact and human alike, combing the expanding debris field for escape pods, lifeboats, and fragments of hull that still carried signs of life. Many were found, many more were not. Losses were tallied in silence, each number representing cultures diminished, families ended, histories truncated. Marroquel worked alongside the rescue crews until exhaustion forced her to stop. Her body bore new injuries she had not noticed in the adrenaline haze, burns and fractures hastily treated by medics who did not ask her to rest so much as ordered it. She ignored them as long as she could, her mind locked on the sensor feeds tracking the adversary's retreat. "It's pulling back toward the galactic rim," Iseth reported, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "Its mass signature is unstable. We're seeing loss rates we've never recorded before." Marroquel nodded slowly. "It will recover." "Yes," Iseth agreed, "but not quickly." That distinction mattered more than any declaration of victory. Time, bought at staggering cost, was the true prize. Teaveth was found among the survivors, retrieved from a damaged administrative module that had been flung clear of the primary detonation. Her injuries were severe by the standards of her species, her fronds torn and her elongated body marked by fractures that would take long cycles to heal. Yet when Marroquel visited her in the medical bay of a hastily assembled command vessel, Teaveth's eyes were clear. "It seems I will continue to adjudicate," Teaveth said, her voice weak but steady, "though the venue has changed." Marroquel allowed herself a small, weary smile. "I'm glad you're alive." "As am I," Teaveth replied. "Though some will question whether that is appropriate, given my role in this decision." "They would have questioned you if you had died too," Marroquel said. "Survival doesn't erase responsibility, it just extends it." Teaveth's fronds shifted in what passed for a smile among her kind. "You speak as if you have practiced this." "We have," Marroquel said quietly. The Emergency Council could not reconvene in the absence of Keshet Station. Instead, a provisional assembly formed aboard a mobile habitat cluster hastily designated as a successor hub. It lacked the grandeur and symbolism of the station, but it moved, and that mobility was now considered an advantage rather than an inconvenience. Representatives gathered again, many fewer than before. Some species had lost their entire delegations. Others were represented by emergency envoys carrying authority far beyond what tradition would normally allow. Grief hung over the assembly like a physical weight, but beneath it lay something new, raw and unstable. Resolve. Teaveth addressed the assembly from a reinforced platform, her presence broadcast to those unable to attend in person. "The compact has endured its greatest loss since its founding," she said. "Keshet Station is gone, billions are dead. We will mourn them, now and for generations to come, but mourning cannot be our only response." She paused, letting the silence settle. "The adversary has been wounded, not by chance, not by inevitability, but by deliberate action. This proves something we did not know before." "That it can be hurt," said a representative, its voice trembling with restrained intensity. "Yes," Teaveth replied, "and that hurting it requires us to act together, decisively, and without the illusion that preservation alone will save us." All eyes turned toward Marroquel, standing at the periphery of the chamber. She had not sought the attention, but she did not shy away from it. "The Council must decide how to proceed," Teaveth continued, "whether this act was an anomaly or the foundation of a new doctrine." The debate that followed was unlike any that had preceded it. Gone was the abstract skepticism, the cautious distance. Every argument was grounded in lived experience, in the memory of shockwaves and dying light. Those who argued for withdrawal did so with less conviction, their voices carrying the strain of having seen retreat fail. Those who argued for total war spoke with urgency, but also with fear, aware now of the true cost. Marroquel was invited to speak last. "We did not win," she said, her voice carrying through the chamber without amplification. "If you tell your people that we did, you will be lying to them. The adversary is still out there. It will adapt. It will come back." A ripple of unease passed through the assembly, but, she continued, "we proved that it is not inevitable. We proved that collective action can force it to change course. We proved that sacrifice, when chosen deliberately and used intelligently, can matter." She took a breath, steadying herself. "Humanity has been fighting this war for a long time. We are tired. We are scarred. We are still standing because we learned to accept loss without surrendering to it. We do not ask you to become us. We ask you to stand with us, each in your own way, and accept that survival will change you." A representative spoke, its form flickering with unstable light. "And if we refuse," Marroquel met its gaze, "then you will die as you are. There is no shame in that, but there is no future in it either." The Provisional Assembly recessed not to argue further, but to draft. What emerged over the following cycles was not a single declaration, but a framework, flexible and unsettling. The compact would not become a monolithic war machine. Instead, it would become something messier and more resilient. Mobile hubs replaced fixed stations. Redundancy became doctrine. Cultural preservation was no longer tied to place, but to distributed archives and living memory. Military structures decentralized, granting unprecedented autonomy to local commanders when facing the adversary. And humanity was woven into all of it. Human officers took advisory roles in compact fleets, their presence sometimes resented, often misunderstood, but increasingly valued. Compact technologies flowed into human hands as well, refined sensors and energy systems integrated into rugged frames built to endure abuse. The exchange was not equal, but it was transformative for both sides. Marroquel was offered a formal position within the compact hierarchy, a title that translated loosely to strategic coordinator. She refused it. "I won't sit above your people and tell them when to die," she said to Teaveth. "I'll stand with them and help them decide." Teaveth accepted that with a nod. "That may be the more dangerous role." "I know," Marroquel replied. Months turned into cycles. The wound in space where Keshet Station had been slowly stabilized, its edges mapped and marked. It became a memorial of sorts, though no structure was built there. The compact chose to leave it raw, a reminder written into the fabric of the universe. The adversary did not return immediately. Its retreat carried it beyond the range of most compact sensors, though long-range probes continued to track its distorted wake. Analysts argued over its next move, its capacity to recover, its potential new strategies. For the first time, those arguments were informed by data bought at unimaginable cost. Humanity did not rest. New ships were built, not in grand shipyards, but in scattered facilities, each designed to be expendable if discovered. Human populations, long accustomed to living with the expectation of evacuation, adapted easily to the compact's new mobility. Some compact species struggled more, mourning worlds and habitats they could no longer afford to defend as fixed points. There were tensions. There were failures. Joint operations went wrong, misunderstandings leading to unnecessary losses. Not every lesson humanity had learned translated cleanly to other psychologies. Adaptation was uneven and painful, but it continued. Marroquel often found herself alone at the end of long planning cycles, staring out at unfamiliar stars from the viewport of whatever mobile hub she currently occupied. The weight of command never truly lifted, even without a formal title. She carried the memories of Aegis, of Keshet Station, of faces that would never look back at her. One such cycle, Teaveth joined her, moving with the slow grace of someone still healing. "Do you regret it?" Teaveth asked. Marroquel did not answer immediately. She watched a distant convoy slip into faster-than-light transit, its wake rippling across the stars. "I regret the cost," she said finally. "I regret every life lost. I regret that this was the best option we had." "But," Teaveth prompted, But I do not regret choosing to act, Marroquel said. We did not let fear decide for us, that matters. Teaveth inclined her head. The compact will be changed by this. Some fear we will lose ourselves. Marroquel shook her head. You won't lose yourselves. You'll learn which parts of yourselves you can't afford to keep. The first report of the adversary's renewed movement arrived sooner than anyone hoped. Its trajectory had shifted, its approach vectors altered, its structure more dispersed than before. It was adapting, cautiously, probing the new patterns of resistance it had encountered. The news did not cause panic. Instead, fleets adjusted. Mobile hubs repositioned. Traps were laid, not around single points, but across regions, layered and overlapping. Humanity's experience was no longer an outlier. It was a reference point. As the compact prepared to face the adversary again, there was no illusion that the next encounter would be decisive. There would be more losses, more terrible choices, more stations that might one day die on purpose. But there was also something else, fragile and hard-won. For the first time since the adversary had emerged, it faced opponents who understood that survival was not about preserving what had been, but about carrying forward what mattered, even when it meant letting go of everything else. Marroquel stood at the center of a planning chamber filled with beings who would once have argued endlessly over procedure. Now they argued over tactics, over how best to hurt an enemy that refused to die. It was not harmony, it was not peace, it was alignment. Humanity had not saved the compact. It had not conquered it, nor bent it to human will. Instead, it had offered something far less comfortable and far more powerful. Proof that broken hands could still build, that endurance was not passive suffering but active defiance, and that even in a universe that devoured worlds, there was value in choosing to stand together and strike back, again and again, until standing was no longer possible. And if that day came, the adversary would learn one final lesson, that it had never been facing prey.